On today's episode, we have a very special guest. The opinions and conversation held in today's episode are personal opinions only and do not reflect any medical association, neither in Australia or worldwide. Neither do they reflect any organisations that are worked in currently by any guests on the Gi Spot podcast. The Gi Spot, I'd hit that.
Welcome to the Gi Spot podcast. My name's Rachael Bradshaw and I'm a black belt in Jiu Jitsu.
Hello, I'm Kaz Page and I'm a purple belt in Jiu Jitsu, and we're back again.
Welcome to 2025.
Do-do-do!
Yay!
And I still can't hit that high note. One day my voice will come back, I'm sure.
Oh, it will.
Hey, welcome back.
Welcome back. What a break.
Yay! It was pretty good.
It was great. We went camping.
We did. We had a ball of a time.
Oh, so good.
Retrospective. There's not, except for the fact that we closed out 2024. We did the last episode really filling in the spots.
Yep.
And we get to start fresh, right?
We do.
So, I don't know, is there a retrospective?
Well, other than just we've had a great Christmas, we've had a great New Year, and we're ready to start with you guys all over again.
Yay! Welcome back, everybody. And we really hope everybody else out there had the same fun with family and friends and no shit-ass relatives.
No, come through it safe and intact, and
Yep.
that's the plan.
And
right?
ready to roll.
Ready to roll. Oh, I like
see
it.
what I did there?
Nice little segue.
I know, I'm so cool. Okay, so today, our first episode on.
First episode back for 2025, and we have a super duper special guest today.
Oh, see, we're going to get into so much trouble for that intro. But go right ahead and introduce our super duper very special guest.
Well, today we have our very, very good friend and student and very important member of our academy, Dr. Phil, on the podcast.
Yay! And it's Dr. Phil Australia, not Dr. Phil America.
From the UK.
And
bloody oath, yeah. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
so, thank you for joining us. I know that we have spoken a lot.
I don't have to work every Christmas, but I have worked 15 out of the last 16, I think.
Wow.
I don't have to work every Christmas, but I have worked 15 out of the last 16, I think.
Wow. Okay, that was genuine from both of us,
That's
by the way.
sad.
It is sad. Do you have to work every Christmas?
I don't have to work every Christmas, but I have worked 15 out of the last 16, I think.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot. That's, but first and foremost, thank you. Because without first responders and people like you,
Yep.
like the world would go to shit even worse than it is. So, thank you.
So I used to work in emergency services in police, and Christmas morning would always be really quiet. And then once people started drinking and spending time with family members they don't normally spend time with, that's when shit would hit the fan. Is that sort of what you see in emergency, or what are the big things that you sort of see on Christmas
it mirrors
Day?
that. And so in the morning, everyone tries to stay at home, and then by the end of the day, sometimes that doesn't go so well, or maybe you get dads trying out the kids' new presents and showing them what they used to be able to do on the BMX bike.
Right. So some broken bones and things like that.
I love how big producer Matt's smile just went there. And he's like, oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
Look, you certainly get an idea of which presents are the new popular toys. So,
Yep.
When trampolines came back into fashion in the early noughties, we certainly got a lot of trampoline injuries, and don't even mention hoverboards.
Oh,
I can imagine.
So before we go in, so we have mentioned before when we introduced the concept of bringing you onto the podcast that you are in emergency department, but can we go back a little bit and just get to know you a little bit? How long have you been in medicine? How long have you been a doctor?
So 25 and a half years now.
Okay.
So I actually trained last century. I don't have to work every Christmas, but I have worked 15 out of the last 16, I think.
Wow.
That's a very good question. I was probably looking more towards going into engineering, I have to say. But at the time, my uncle was a production engineer in his 50s and got laid off.
Oh, wow.
So I was looking at that and said, look, if a company can get me to my 50s and then go, you're out, I'll look at something else.
Okay. And so medicine just kind of popped up?
It was on the list of the things that the career people suggested from a questionnaire we had to do at school. So I was like, I'll give that a go.
Give it a go. I'll just throw my hat in the ring, see how we go. So was emergency department always the plan?
Not always, but every bit of medicine that I've done, I've enjoyed.
Okay.
And so you have to rotate through lots of different specialties when you're a junior doctor. And then also for emergency training, it helps to rotate through a lot. So I can't really think of a specialty I didn't find something I liked about it, but I've got ADHD. I like a little bit of everything. I like being able to just stand up and help somebody wherever I am.
Okay.
Not going, oh, I'm really sorry, I only operate on left ankles. So if it's anything else, I'm out.
As an emergency department doctor, I would think, or even in that, I don't know what you call it, but in that area of medicine, you'd have to almost be an expert of all things human body, right? Head to toe.
I have to know something about everything. I don't have to be an expert at everything.
Okay. Because then you can call in the experts to come in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And the fast pace of emergency, I mean, you referenced ADHD and coming from a very big family of that area.
Yeah.
That fast paced, that's a positive for you?
I love chaos.
Yeah. It's most ADHD.
And adrenaline, I would imagine, and having something shock you and surprise you and...
You get less shocked the more you do it.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so medicine is obviously a big part of your world, and you're the head of the emergency department of the area that you work in?
No, I'm one of the consultants working there.
Okay.
I'm not the director of the department, no.
Okay. But you're very senior, obviously been there a long time. You know the realms.
Trained last century.
What?
He says it in such a deep kind of stoic.
But it's awesome because it also means I'm not the oldest person in the room right now, and I'll take it.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not. How old are you?
49.
Ah, shut up. There's the door. I thought we were friends. You could have lied.
Aww.
Never mind. I'll own it.
That's all right.
Okay, so tell me just a little bit outside of, and not jiu-jitsu right now because we're going to get to that, but outside of medicine and outside of jiu-jitsu, who are you and what do you do?
So I probably spend most of my time working on the farm. My wife's a crazy horsewoman, and so I'd say probably work 40, 50 hours a week on the farm, and we also have a small Airbnb and a couple of campsites, and then we do some conservation work on the side.
Oh, wow.
And in spare time, work a little bit with the RFS.
When the Rural Fire Service.
Yeah, good point.
For people who aren't in Australia.
For all of our other listeners outside of the country, yeah, good call.
Yeah.
When do you sleep?
What?
Yeah.
Sleep is for the weak.
Yeah, fair call. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as you know, the gi spot is all things central around jiu-jitsu and how we can incorporate that into all other aspects of our lives as well. But what brought you and how long ago did it bring you? What brought you to Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
So when I was at uni, I did Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
And so going back to 95, I did Japanese jiu-jitsu, and my housemate at the time and I went and signed up and did it together over in the UK in Newcastle upon Tyne.
Yep.
The proper Newcastle.
I've been there. Do you love Newcastle? Yes.
And I mean, at the time, it was just after Hoyce had been involved in the first UFCs, and so we were obviously aware of that. But again, there wasn't any internet. It was just watching things occasionally if they pop up on TV or Trans World Sport or something. You know, unless you were involved, you wouldn't get to see that regularly. And then did that for about 10 years in the UK around work and study, and couldn't get to it as often as I wanted. Tried to train twice a week, didn't always make it.
Okay.
Then had a hiatus of, I'd say, when we came over to Australia in 2004, and that's when I stopped training Japanese Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay.
And in Sydney for a while, I did train briefly briefly a few times with a slightly different style of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. Moved up to the Central Coast in 2005 and asked around about whether there's any Jiu-Jitsu up here, and they said, oh, look, there's this Brazilian stuff, and to be honest, they're thugs. You don't want to get involved. I was like, oh, okay. Thugs, interesting, yeah. Maybe I won't try that out just yet.
Not as refined as the Japanese
Yeah,
jiu-jitsu.
So, yeah, it was a bit of a break from that. Got busy with other stuff. Then 2017, a good friend of mine from in the UK who I used to train with, who I used to work on the door with, he unfortunately died in the UK. And that made me really think about jiu-jitsu again, about whether I should be training again.
Because of your connection to him or because of the way he died?
Because of the connection to him.
Okay, yep.
So and I suppose it reconnected me with a few of the people from back then that I was still in touch with, but not quite as often as I had been.
Okay.
And then I was at work, and this young ginger lad came in with a cast on his arm, and his mum, both absolutely covered head to toe in fight logos.
That's not entirely true.
Head to toe.
Head to toe.
It's not entirely true. So we're talking about Connor. How old was Connor back then? Do you reckon about
Your
9?
son.
Well,
2017.
2017. So 2006 he was born, so 11. Yeah, am I correct?
Something like that.
Something like that.
I'm not a mathematician.
Poor Connor broke his wrist.
It was 7.5
Doing
years
jiu-jitsu?
ago.
No, he was riding down the road on his push bike, and a fly went into his mouth, and he spat it out, and it landed on his shoulder. And while he's looking at his shoulder, he's kept going on his bike and smacked into the back of a parked ute.
Wow.
Poor kid.
Oh my God, that's more that him and I have in common with.
I wish I'd known that at the time, because that's way funnier.
Well, we did tell you that story.
You probably told the people that saw him first up, because I was only reviewing.
Oh, triage,
okay.
yeah.
Well,
Okay, that's so funny.
can I just give my point of view? Because we
Yep.
went into the pediatric section, and in walks this doctor, very stoic looking, like exactly how you look, but he was wearing this bright red Hawaiian shirt. And he sat down and introduced himself. Hello, my name's Dr. Phil, and I'll be having a look at you today. And that's where the story. But we weren't wearing head to toe fight stuff.
Oh no, he said head to toe, so we're going with it. That's it. You can't argue a doctor.
It was relatively subtle, but it was obvious. To anybody who's trained, it was obvious.
Yeah. I think Connor had a Wollongong comp T-shirt on.
Oh yeah.
And I had a tracksuit sort of with the zip done up. And underneath I had a T-shirt that had iconic. Yeah.
No, it wasn't iconic back then.
Wasn't?
No,
Best in
no.
Gracie.
Oh,
We
Best
were.
in
But
Gracie.
you also had the clothing you were wearing was fight branded.
Oh,
as well.
okay. Oh, there you go. I don't remember that.
And anyone interested in martial arts on any level, I mean, it's going to be a red flag, right? It's going to be a peak of interest
Yeah.
and
Well, especially
curiosity.
with
So,
John just being a couple of weeks before, so
Yeah.
it was
so you were already in that headspace. And
absolutely. Yeah.
So did you ask?
I got bantering with Connor about whether he'd done it fighting,
Oh yeah.
and then obviously found out it wasn't. But Rach said, "Oh no, but we do train jiu-jitsu, and my husband's the coach." I was like, "Oh, where's that?"
Ah.
And then turned up the week later,
Yep.
Oh, cool. And ever since.
and I got this very sheepish look from Connor, who I'd said he shouldn't really be training with a caster. And he was there, gi on in the background. I'm like,
I know, we were so busted. We're like, the doctors actually showed up to check on him. And I think the first thing I said was like, but he's not really training. He's just over there standing, helping coach the kids. He's not actually doing
Sure.
it himself.
Yeah. Busted.
Oh, it was so surreal.
Can I just ask, having never done Japanese jiu-jitsu, how did you find the difference? Was it thuggerish?
I think the thuggish comment from some of the people who knew about it was more based on the personalities involved than the sport.
Right. Fair.
bizarrely, if I'd actually started training back then, it probably would have been with Grant back in the mid-noughties.
Yeah.
Yep. Fair enough. And, in regards to the differences in the physical attributes of the martial arts itself, do you notice a lot of difference?
So the Japanese stuff was a lot more learning how to fall as well.
Okay.
And a lot more of the throws that you see in judo, but from a self-defense style. So you weren't doing static randori necessarily where you've got to make the other person move. It was more someone was attacking you with a baseball bat. What do you do about it?
Yep.
So if you think about the self-defense syllabus that Iconic uses now from the Gracie stuff, it was more that style of stuff, but a little bit wider syllabus.
Okay.
A lot more weapons.
And so I'm assuming you love it, given that we see you turn up week in, week out, and you're progressing through and getting on the mats.
Yeah, I'd say I'm fairly addicted.
So 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21,
7.5 years.
7.5 years.
It was the May.
There you go. And you're a purple belt now.
Yeah.
And you coach one of our very, very early morning classes. 6 a.m. class, which exists only on the timetable because you teach it.
But it only exists because I went to you and Grant and said, look, I'm not getting to enough classes. Can I just have, can I open up in the early mornings and just see who turns up and we'll just do something?
Yep.
And I think to begin with it was like, oh no, but you have to be a purple belt to do an open mat. And so we'll work something out. So we called it the anatomy lab to begin with.
Yep.
And that was just over 3 years ago.
Yep.
Wow, that's awesome.
So to begin with, there were about 6 of us who were training regularly, 2 blue belts and a couple of fairly experienced white belts and then drop-ins. So it's changed a bit over the years, but we still haven't really broken the 6 people mark very often.
6 a.m.
Yeah, 6 people for 6 a.m.
Yeah.
It's poetic.
It's an early call, I got to say. So tell me now, if we can just transition a little bit, we wanted to bring you on to talk about things that happen from jiu-jitsu and the common kind of ailments that you see. Now, we can progress into the bigger stuff as well, but in 7 years of me being on these mats, and I know that hindsight, if I had have done things differently at the start, would have maybe given me a little less grief in my initial first couple of years. What would you say from a medical perspective? And again, disclaimer at the start, this is just your personal opinion, but with, 25 years experience on the table, what would you say are the most common things that you see come out of jiu-jitsu that people could avoid?
Okay, so I think the biggest problem with jiu-jitsu, combat sports, football, rugby, horse riding is people don't like to admit they're injured. And so the biggest thing that I see is actually people not presenting to hospital. And they try and fix it themselves, or they get their mate to have a quick look and strap it up and she'll be right. And, for example, you might want to make sure you make it to your black belt grading.
And ignore a finger injury.
Maybe forget the fact you dislocated a couple of fingers and you've got another hand, right?
I wish we had a camera on producer Matt right now. I really do.
It's giggles galore.
I've never seen him blush.
And I know it's not too soon because I teased him about this.
No, it's never too soon for this one.
But, that late presentation is often what we see. And sometimes that can make it a bit more challenging to know what's going on because you're seeing something that has started to heal.
Yeah.
Right.
And sometimes what we get is pathological healing. So it's not necessarily healing in the way it should if it's not managed early. And so I think the biggest side that I'd love to see is actually people presenting earlier.
Okay.
As for what sort of things that come through, a lot of limb injuries. And they're not necessarily from people having arm bars put on too hard or whatever. It's often just stubbing your toe on the mat or landing awkwardly when you get swept or when you get thrown. So I think I heard a statistic earlier this week that Danaher reckons it's 90% from gravity that causes the injuries in jiu-jitsu rather than actually putting on a submission.
Wow.
Having said that, every now and again you'll get somebody who's injured with an armbar that has been gripped and ripped, and that
Overextension versus breakage.
Well, armbars isn't. You're not really breaking bones there. You are tearing ligaments normally, and it's normally ligamentous injuries of limbs. So the sort of elastic bands that hold the side of joints together.
What, in regards to rehab, does that look like? If somebody was to present early, a healing rate of ligaments in the arm versus someone who tries to ignore it and continues and presents a bit later, is there a difference in the healing time?
So that question is impossible to answer as a general thing. So it is incredibly dependent on the different injuries that you can actually pick up.
Okay.
And so the earlier you see a health professional about it and start the correct rehab process, then the best chance you have of not re-injuring it, but also about getting back to function early. I don't know if you guys follow Mike Pekarski, Dr. Kickass on Instagram.
Yep.
He does some great summaries of injury patterns, and I've been following him for a few years as well.
Just say that again. Come a bit closer.
So there's Dr. Kickass on Instagram, Mike Pekarski. He's a physio from the US.
Right,
So
okay.
He does some great summaries of different injuries that he sees in jiu-jitsu and MMA comps.
Okay.
And he did a table sometime last year, I'll probably repost it again soon, which is a rough healing time for different injuries, about how many months you're likely to be out.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Okay, that's a good breakdown.
Look, it is, and I shared it to the Iconic group at the time, so if you search back through that, you'll probably find it.
Yeah, we'll look it up and we'll put it on the socials on the release for this episode too.
Yeah.
So they can get access to it.
That's a great resource, I think, to have.
He's a great resource.
Yep.
And
Dr. Kickass.
He's a physiotherapist who specialises. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu as well, and so he specialises in injury rehab for jiu-jitsu athletes.
Yep. Okay.
That's cool. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, so let's talk about rehabs then, and let's talk about some of the more common injuries that you see. If people are presenting early, what's the injury that you're seeing, and what is the kind of rehab and care structure that you would advise to these kind of injuries?
So, most of the time I'm actually not seeing these guys through emergency. I'm seeing them on the mats.
Well, that's at Iconic. But there are other jiu-jitsu academies around.
Other academies are available.
Not that we talk about. Shh, don't. No, I'm kidding.
Look, again, it's really hard to say because it really depends on the injury. And I suppose that the most important thing is if you get injured, what you don't need necessarily is a scan.
Yep.
What you need is a healthcare professional who's used to looking at injuries to assess you and actually physically examine you.
Okay.
And so that's what I would urge people to do early. Now, for limb injuries, back injuries, physiotherapists are my go-to first.
Yep.
So you can go to your GP. It may be something that they specialise in. It may not. So like with emergency, GPs are generalists who are specialised in being generalists. So they know a lot across the board and they can coordinate care, but they may not be the person who is going to finalise that care for you.
Yep.
So they may well refer you on to a physio.
Yep. We have an amazing physiotherapist that we've been seeing for, it'd have to be close to 8 years now, if not longer. Even to the point where my surgeon, after my neck surgery, when I said who my physio was, the surgeon went, "I'm handing your care over to him."
Yeah.
And he can liaise with me if he thinks I need to see you again, which was huge for me. That was amazing.
Yeah.
But he is definitely, anything that is limb related, we will go to him before we'd go to our GP.
And I think that's absolutely fair because a good practitioner of any sort will tell you when they're not the right person to be looking after you.
Yep.
So if you go to the physio and they go, "Look, actually, I'm a bit worried it's something that I can't deal with. Let's get you help from somewhere else." That's when you involve the GP or the emergency department as well.
Yep.
So you don't have to necessarily always rush to the emergency department, for example.
No.
You could give it the next day, book in with your physio.
Look, certain things are really important to go and get looked at straight away. So if you have a neck injury
Yep.
and if you're struggling at the time, then you should go to get seen sooner rather than later.
Yep.
If you've got a lot of pain, you should go and get seen straight away. If you have numbness or weakness of something, you should go and get seen straight away. So, for example, unfortunately, I recently had a back issue. Now, that wasn't an injury related. So I had numbness and weakness to my left leg. So I got seen relatively quickly.
I was going to say, how often do you follow your own advice, Dr. Phil?
I'm not here to talk about me.
Subtle.
Do as I say, not as I do.
But I have been seeing a really amazing physio afterwards as well, and so she's been really helping me get back on the track after the surgeon did his bit. So.
Yeah.
Have you been injured through jiu-jitsu?
I've had a lot of black eyes, mainly related to Canadians, but that's.
We're not just
Shout out to Canadians.
Yeah.
Just one or two? There's three.
Yeah.
We've got three on the mats. All three.
Whichever you think.
So any Canadians out there listening, and I know we've got Canadians out
We
there
do.
listening, come on down to Australia.
We love rolling with you because it makes it hard.
What do you do outside of jiu-jitsu to keep your body in good condition, besides working on the farm, because I know what that entails? But is there other stuff that you're doing that's helping your limbs, keeping them stretched, flexible, or anything like that?
Okay. So that's a very good question. And I think before my back issues this year, I probably wasn't doing enough.
Mm-hmm.
So I had got out of the habit of making the time for me to do the correct sort of strength work and core work to keep myself fit for jiu-jitsu and fit for life. And so that's one thing that this year has taught me. Now, you may think if you've got a physical job, so there's a lot of tradies we have working with us, and they're exhausted at the end of the day and think, well, no, I've been working hard all day. Same with us on the farm, and you think that, great, but actually you're doing very specific things that aren't necessarily doing good core work. You're not necessarily working all the muscles in your body. And so it is important to have a routine that you have. Now that may be a stretching flexibility routine for certain things like hips, or it may be a strength thing. Strength's probably been shown to be a little bit more important than stretching.
Okay.
But
why do you say that?
So static stretching can be really good for right now. Can make you feel really good short term.
Mm-hmm.
If you want long-term improvements to something, you generally have to strengthen the muscles involved with it as well. So just stretching on its own is probably not the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so things like yoga and Pilates, for example, people think, oh, it's just stretching, but actually it's not. So you're actually doing quite a lot of strength work when you're doing a yoga workout.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just the stretching side of it, it's actually the strengthening of the muscles involved and those control muscles.
Can we start from, say, the outside and work our way in a little bit? Because I know in jiu-jitsu and any time that you're doing combat sport with skin touching skin and things like that, you can be susceptible to skin conditions, and they can be quite infectious, and you can pass them on to other people. Sometimes people don't really know what they're looking at.
Yeah.
So the two biggest ones that I know of, obviously, are ringworm and staph. Is there any other sort of skin condition you might watch out for?
Oh, absolutely. So, look, and as you say, your tinea infection, so ringworm, athlete's foot, jock itch, that's probably the most common fungal infection.
Right.
And then staph is the infection you think about on the skin, but there are other bacteria that cause skin infections too, and they behave in a similar way from our point of view.
So what are you looking out for? Like, what's your first indications that, that's...
I just need to cover scabies first before you. So there's also...
Sorry. Okay, keep going.
There's also larger bugs like mites and so scabies, crabs, that sort of thing.
Hang on, we're trying to get more people to do jiu-jitsu, not frighten them off too much.
Here's my next point though. I've yet to hear of anybody passing on scabies on the mats, because the message is out there that if you're infected, you stay away.
Yes.
And so with scabies, you get really itchy, and so people stay away. Now, probably more common on the coast would be something like pelican itch or sea lice.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not contagious, but they're really itchy. But
Yep.
people probably stay away because they're really irritant, and it is unpleasant to get warm and sweaty
Yep.
while you've got those things. So back to your question. So
Hang on, we skipped crabs.
They're good for dinner? I don't know.
Sorry, back to your question. I'm just trying to visualise going to the doctors and being told you've got crabs. And you've got it from Jiu Jitsu.
unfortunately, Kaz, over the age of 35, you're incredibly unlikely to get crabs.
Yeah. So,
lost it.
anyone 20 to 35, watch out for the crabs.
If you're getting it in jiu-jitsu, you're probably doing it wrong.
And jiu-jitsu too. Sorry.
We'll now go to a commercial break while Kaz recovers.
Hang on,
God.
this is really nice because you made me lose it a couple of episodes ago. So this is payback time.
That was awesome. Sorry.
Deep breaths.
Back to your
Are
question.
you with us?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep, I've moved on from crabs. We're good. Back to skin conditions.
To the serious topic. Dr. Phil's not impressed right now, Kaz.
Apologies.
Bring it back into line. Okay. Sorry, Dr. Phil. Go on.
I've forgotten the question.
Yeah, you moved. You were asking a question,
Okay.
but then we had to pull
So
back to scabies.
What? Oh goodness, yeah, that's right. What are people looking out for? So they look down on their skin, they notice a little bump or something like that. What's an indication that it's not just a scratch or a pimple or something, but maybe it's something worse that they need to get checked out?
Okay, so I think most people are actually pretty good at looking at things like pimples, and we've all been teenagers, been through
Ingrown hairs
that
and-
phase.
yes.
And so if you've got something that's like that, great. If you can cover it up, deal with it, that's not a risk. If you start to get something that is spreading on your skin, is super itchy, is not going away in a day or two, or you can't cover it to train, then you shouldn't be training.
Yep.
And the GPs are a great first port of call for rashes. They're much better at them than I am.
Mm-hmm.
So as for what you do with them, well, again, it just really depends where it is and what you're presented with. So a lot of parents have seen impetigo, which is a staph infection of a cut usually, where you can get this golden crusting to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's because Staph aureus is a gold colour bacteria, so it creates this golden colour crust.
Okay.
And that normally needs antibiotics.
I've heard a couple of people have different opinions, and I'm not sure is when you have something like ringworm,
Yeah.
do you put cream on it, or is there an antibiotic for it?
So you can get antifungals that you take as a tablet,
Right.
but it's usually the first line will be to use cream on it.
Okay.
And so they can be with or without a steroid to help with the itch as well. And your pharmacist can advise on that.
And then I've heard that people have said that their doctor has mentioned that if they put it on or they use the tablet for 48 hours, then they can go back to training even if the rash is still present. And there's been an argument. I've seen argument online about this. I've seen people talk about it. If you're still physically seeing something, can you cover it and go train if you've been on the antibiotics or whatever for 48 hours, or should you not train at all?
Look, if you can't physically cover something, especially if it's weeping or it's got a crust or there's any sort of fluid coming out of it, then you shouldn't be training.
Right.
So
Irrelevant of what it is. Right?
Irrelevant. Well, certain things are a bit more risky, so I haven't mentioned shingles yet either. And so, again, because we've got a lot of people on the mats who are over 40 who'd had chickenpox as kids,
Yep.
then shingles is very possible.
Yep.
Shingles is incredibly contagious if you haven't had chickenpox before. So that's the sort of thing that you should be not training with. Absolutely.
And shingles will knock you on your ass.
Look, it can do, or it can present really benign.
Okay.
And so you may not have many symptoms at all other than a bit of a rash, but it will be in a really, sometimes it can be a really sharp distribution that follows where the nerve goes underneath it. So your GP will normally recognise shingles straight away.
Okay.
Is there preventative stuff that you can use on your skin that kind of repels, like we use sunscreen to repel the sun?
We call it washing.
Yes, thank you. But is there better stuff than others? We use, I don't know what it's called. I can't remember.
Defense soap or something like that?
No.
We've got defense soap. We use Pfizer Hex as well, but that was for the decolonisation protocol.
Right. So Pfizer Hex, which is what Matt just said, like, do you know or do you recommend stuff that people can use as a body wash that is better than just standard soap?
So as producer Matt was just saying there, if you need to do something to clear your skin because it's been colonised, then using something that is antibacterial is very useful, and your pharmacist should be able to advise on that. Most of the time you don't want that. You want bacteria on your skin because they're there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yep.
part of you. They're going to actually probably prevent bad bacteria being able to take a foothold.
Okay.
So actually just normal soap and water is just as good for most people as long as you're washing properly. So as
Right.
long as you wash and you wash your gi, obviously if you wash your fall out.
Yeah. That's why I'm useless at jiu-jitsu.
Because you keep washing your
Keep
belt.
washing my belt.
So we don't want to go to training and then come home and sit in our sweat for the next 3 hours. We want to
No.
have a shower fairly quickly. We want to throw our stuff into the wash.
Yeah.
You can buy even like antibacterial wash stuff that you just sort of throw a scoop in with your wash these days.
You can, but if
too.
you're, especially if you're drying it on the line,
Mm.
then that sunlight's going to be amazing for killing bacteria as well.
Yep.
That's a huge one, right? That sunlight, our geese out on the line is probably the biggest thing that I try and push for more often than not.
Yeah. Although you've got to be really careful at the moment because when it's 43 degrees, the lapels tend to shrink.
The rubber shrinks in the lapels. You learnt that the hard way.
I did.
Yeah, in a dryer.
On low, but yeah, I won't be
Do you
buying
know,
that gear
I've
again.
got to say, we've never had a problem except for that one gi with Willow's legs.
Yeah.
Where Willow didn't.
I think she
not
also
grow that
probably
fast.
sprouted a little.
Yeah, I don't know that
It's like
fast though.
Two things happened at
Yeah.
once.
But yeah, we've never really, we've been lucky, touch wood. Geese in dryer have been okay.
Sunlight on your skin, if you've got stuff like that, or is that not helpful?
Look, it really depends what it is. So again, because this is very general,
Yeah.
and the best thing with all these things is go and get someone to have a look at it early.
Yeah.
And because then you'll be able to get an opinion, but you also get somebody who will be able to follow it up over time and see whether it's responding to treatment.
All right.
I want to change the landscape a little bit here.
What's wrong with rashes?
Because I can't contain myself and I lose my shit and I get into trouble.
I'm happy to move away from rashes. I have to say.
Yeah, fair call. You, in your line of work, you would obviously see a lot of injuries coming through that are different sports related and would have opinions on good, bad and indifferent. In martial arts, a lot of the forms take on a self-defense protocol. In our biggest thing, we have 3 daughters, and we have always said and agreed from day dot that jiu-jitsu was mandatory for them.
Yeah.
From that self-defense perspective. Given all the injuries and landscapes and all the rest of it, your personal opinion, would you like to see jiu-jitsu in schools?
Absolutely. And I've actually chatted to the principal of my daughter's primary school about whether it's something we should be looking at using that early.
Yep.
I suppose the problem for schools is you've only got so much time in the curriculum and
Yep.
you've got to pick what you do. And I think it was Jocko that said, if you're going to teach your kids one thing, teach them swimming. And if you're going to teach them 2 things, teach them jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
Mm.
So from a self-defense perspective, I mean, obviously in a domestic violence world, which I guess you would see as well, how important do you think it could be if we could get people from your kind of background with your experience to have a louder voice in this regard and try and push this as more of a line of protectiveness from that regard? It doesn't seem to have a big enough voice in regards to what it can offer from a self-defense perspective.
Yeah, well, the problem there, though, is if you start to teach it to everybody, then both sides
get the skills.
get the same skills.
Yeah.
So I am not in a position or equipped to deal with the question of, would this help with domestic violence? That's really not my specialty.
Yeah. From a female perspective, I reckon, though.
There's so many other things that go into domestic violence as well, though.
Yeah.
Like, the power imbalance and the emotional, abuse over time and the gaslighting.
You would have seen a lot of it from your
it's just
experience on the calls.
I think really strong women who have been caught up in situations of domestic violence didn't see it coming and then realised that they were stuck in it. You know, there's been fighters that have been in domestic violence situations, like UFC fighters. There was a famous one that came out a few years ago. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it goes so much deeper.
Yeah.
It's not just a self-defense thing.
And it often doesn't start physical.
Yeah.
So if you got something that starts with undermining, gaslighting, and that psychological side, then your jiu-jitsu isn't going to help you there straight away. Yeah, you might be a little bit more resilient because of the jiu-jitsu, but I don't think it's the only answer there.
Do you see jiu-jitsu as an important part from a mental health perspective?
Oh, absolutely. I've always said it's actually my meditation. So I can't sit there and say for hours. But
The ADHD doesn't let you.
well, no, absolutely not, because my brain's all over the place.
Yep.
But if I've got a 140 kilo guy on top of me trying to squash me, then I've only got one thing I can think about.
Yep. So let's break that down a bit for a second, because you mentioned before that you are ADHD.
Yeah.
So where does this fit in regards to helping that? Let's break that down. For anybody who's listening that does have ADHD and hasn't maybe explored the avenues of what jiu-jitsu can help in that realms, can you just break that down a little bit more than just a 140 kilo guy on top of you?
That would suggest that I've broken it down in my own head.
Ah. Let's try.
Look, the giving somebody the ability to have something to focus on and making them have no choice about it is something that's really hard to do by yourself with ADHD. And having something that is, I mean, you put yourself into that position, but it's short bursts. So you got 5 minutes of having a spar with somebody, rolling with somebody, and for that 5 minutes, you're concentrating just on that.
Yep.
That's something that it's hard to do externally. It's hard to do with things like schoolwork. It's hard to do with, when you're actually at work.
Mm-hmm.
So to have that enforced 5 minute bursts, right now you get a break. That's amazing for ADHD.
Yep. Do you then get to take what you've learnt in regards to the skill set of doing jiu-jitsu? Do you apply that then anywhere else in your world? Like, do you see that has given you additional skills to take outside of the mats?
That's hard to answer, because I think I learnt to manage my ADHD before I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, the waters are muddied a bit.
Okay. Hypothetically, do you think it could for younger people with ADHD?
For some people, it definitely will make a difference. For others, they won't cope with it.
Right.
It really depends on that person.
Yep. And the support, the community around, has that given you anything in regards to Brazilian? We talk a lot in our episodes in regards to the community in the jiu-jitsu landscape.
So there's a couple of things about community that have been really highlighted to me, and one of them is through COVID. So when everyone had to be really separate through COVID, I mean, to be honest, for our family, most of life didn't change much except homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
You're a convert there. I am not.
We were. Landscape changed again.
But it actually gave that community to be able to talk, and I was probably talking to Grant and Rach more than most people through COVID. And so that actually gave that community that persisted through the lockdowns and the inability to speak to other people. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've missed in the past, so I've not been in the forces like Matt, but I spent a lot of time playing in team sports that were very physical. So I played a lot of rugby, for 20 odd years back in the UK. And so you get very close to those teammates because you really rely on them to be right by you or you're in trouble.
Yep.
And I worked on the door for 5 years as a student. And again, you have the same, if you don't have somebody with your back, then you might get in a world of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And Jiu Jitsu is the closest I've had to that afterwards.
Yep.
Mm.
Matt said the same in regards to the forces
Yeah.
and then coming into this landscape as well.
I feel like when you're younger, you have more of those opportunities presented to you. You go through school with your schoolmates and you're learning all this stuff and your brain is so,
Sponge-like.
yeah, malleable, and you just, I don't know, you form these really close connections and close bonds, and this is where you make some of your lifetime friends and things like that. Then you go out in the world and you sort of adult.
Yep.
And your world becomes smaller for a
Yeah.
while. You get married and you have kids and you don't see those friends as much. I feel like jiu-jitsu opens your world back up.
Yeah, 100%.
Try moving hemispheres.
Yeah.
So you have to reset everything. So you lose all your school friends, you lose uni friends because you've started again. You don't have family close by either. So
You like changing planets.
it's can be quite isolating. Yeah.
Mm. Yep, and it's not a quick journey to claw back to a community either.
Adults don't want new adult friends if they have a community that they've grown up with that they're happy with.
Yep.
So if you move cities, towns, countries, whatever, trying to break into a friend circle that's established is incredibly challenging unless there's a common pathway for you.
Mm.
Jiu-Jitsu can give you that common pathway.
Yeah, it's really cool. I love how that does that. And it's just across the board, isn't it? And you can go travel. Like we've talked about traveling and training and things like that before, but you can go travel and just be invited instantly into a little community.
Absolutely,
No
and
matter
I'm
where you
grateful
go.
for it. We have so many super close people in our world that live halfway across the world
Yeah.
because of this martial arts that we would never have met had it not have been for jiu-jitsu. We would have done the trip. We would have gone around the world. We just wouldn't have gone in and trained in different jiu-jitsu schools had we have not been so entrenched in this martial arts. And so therefore none of these people would have been in our world. And, they're all amazing. We did the trip back in 2019 and here we are 6 years later and they are still immersed in our world to the point where I speak to them every week.
Mm.
So, I've got a lot to be grateful for in regards to this martial arts.
When, as a doctor, we have a very strong sense of safety at Iconic, and we talk about safety on the mats all the time. We talk about looking after your training partners and making sure you tap because it's on you as well. You can't not tap and then expect your partner to stop and then blame them if you get hurt, that sort of thing. So we talk about this stuff all the time, but
I blame Matt a lot.
oh no, he doesn't hurt you though. And you tap.
No.
No. He just knows when to stop. He's like, I better stop now or I'm going to pay for this later.
She's going to be cranky.
What are some things that you would like to see that could make, general advice for coaches out there that are listening, because we do have a few coaches that listen to the podcast. What would your advice to be for them? What kind of messaging, what kind of, things up around the place? Do we need to put posters up with skin, showing skin infections? Do we need to talk about...
Please don't.
No, I know it's gross. I've actually been to academies that they have them in the change room.
Little crabs.
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, yeah.
I'll let
And
go, I
it's
promise.
kind of like very confronting
So
when
many
you walk
things I
into...
want to say now, but I'm being very good.
Well, you're doing better than me.
It's very confronting
I
when you
control my
walk
ADHD.
into... I'm not going to get this out.
I'm yet to learn.
The problem with podcasting is when people talk over the top of each other, no one
Sorry.
can hear anything.
Sorry, everybody. I'll shut up now. All right, back to you, Rach.
Oh, I don't even remember what I was saying. But
Do we
as a
put posters
doctor,
up?
don't put posters up. What would you like to see? What messaging? What can we do better? What can the thugs of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu do better to make sure that our students stay as safe as possible?
Look, just let's touch on posters to begin with. So if you put a poster up, it'll work for a week.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, it'll just be that thing in the background that you don't notice anymore because it's always been there.
Right,
And
so you got to
don't
move
read it.
posters around.
Well, certainly
That's not a bad
if you
idea.
want people to look at them again, you have got to change it up. So
Mm.
you can't just set and forget.
Right.
But I think a lot more important is that culture that's ingrained in an academy, and I mean maybe even in the sport as a whole. So you have to make it normal to tap. You've got to normalize the higher belts letting their ego go when they get bested by somebody who they feel shouldn't best them.
Mm.
And I think you guys have talked before about how if you've got a young athletic blue belt who's 20 years younger than one of the black belts, there's no reason why their skill level in certain facets might be slightly higher than that black belt.
Yep.
And so the black belt will certainly have a wider skill set, but they may not quite have drilled down triangles from weird positions as a bendy, athletic 20-year-old blue belt.
Yep.
And so if you normalize seeing the black belts and the brown belts and the purple belts allowing themselves, when they know that they've been bettered, to just go, yep, you got me. And instead of then trying to coach the person through it, go, wow, awesome. You might have to show me that one because you smashed me with that.
Yep.
You know, that creates the culture that it's okay to do that.
Grant says it all the time. Training's training.
Yep.
Training is training. And it doesn't matter if you get tapped or you tap someone out. No one's keeping score of how many times you have been tapped or you have tapped on these mats. It is just training. And when we can start to sort of let that sink in more, then you're not going to beat the mat. You're not going to win training, you know, so that's
If you look at
important.
Grant, for Grant to be able to equalise things, to actually have a fun role with somebody, he's usually got to put himself in a position at the academy where he's disadvantaged to start with. And if he doesn't do that, it's going to be a very short role.
Yeah.
Or a lot of taps by the other person.
Going back.
Depends what kind of mood he's in and if he's training for a comp.
But maybe 5 or 6 years ago, he was working on arm bars from the people on his back.
Yep.
And so he would let people take his back.
Yep.
And they're like, oh, wow, this is amazing. I've got Grant's back. Oh, I'm tapping.
My bad.
But when you're learning those sort of new techniques, and if you're working on something as because when you're a white belt or a blue belt, they're just surviving.
Yep.
But you get to purple belt, brown belt, black, you usually have a goal in mind with some of the roles that you're doing. And if you want to work on arm bars from the back, you've got to put yourself in that position, and you're going to mess it up sometimes.
Yeah.
It's still a legitimate tap from the other person. They still have to finish it.
Yep.
So
Have you, in coming into this sport through your journey, was there a transitional point where you realised that you had too much ego, or that's never been an issue for you?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know whether you necessarily get this light bulb moment. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And sometimes you take a step backwards. So if you haven't rolled for a while, you tend to come back and you go, bull in a china shop, and because you just want to roll, you want to roll hard because you haven't done it for a while, and then you can creep back into using a little bit too much force. You can be a bit of a dick, and so sometimes you have to rein yourself in again.
Yep.
But I think Rach talked about it a couple of months ago on the podcast about being able to play.
Yep.
And if you get to that point where you feel you can play, you can enjoy your every roll a bit more.
That was such a damn light bulb moment for me coming across to Iconic, was that concept. I had it once before from a friend of mine, Jason, over in America. And it was just that. And to be fair to all the rats that I had trained with, the rats had always said, Kaz, too hard. Like, slow your roll. Just slow down, look at your technique and everything. And I had little earplugs in my ears and off I would go again. And then Jace kind of worked with me for a little bit when we were over there, and coming into Iconic and rolling with Rach predominantly, but Grant as well. And Grant would get me into positions and then he'd just look down at me and smile and like, I can let go now, but just so you know, like where I'm keeping this roll going with you. And Rach a couple of times we got to the end of the roll and she kind of made comment, you know, she introduced me to the concept of the four breathing, the square breathing. And it was very subtle, but it was, you're going so hard and look at me.
I don't think I ever said that.
No. But now getting to know you and understanding and that, you know, I call her the smiling assassin, because I would go hard as, and she would just be at the end of the roll just smiling at me like, how is that? It's like, and I learned that there is more with play and there is more enjoyment with play than there is with trying to win.
There's more learning with play. You have freedom in play to try new things, and because
that's not saying that you're not working hard either.
Oh no. Well, you can play intensely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But you give yourself a freedom to be able to explore. And try new things and try different answers.
I think you just nailed it. It's giving myself permission to enjoy it.
Yeah.
To take myself into that learning realm as opposed to competing realm.
So it's a fallacy to think that adult learners don't need play as well.
Yeah.
And when I was actually in the Scouts for a lot of years, and I used to help my Scout leader teach kayaking a long time ago. And we were doing this session for other leaders from other troops. And I said, well, you know, we won't need to use as many games as we do with our lads for this lot. He said, no, we've got to use more. Because these guys have been at work all day. They're tired. Their brain's tired. You've got to use more play and you'll get so much more out of it.
Yep.
We learn by playing.
Yep.
We're animals. All animals learn by play.
Yep. And as adults, we kind of, I think, have a tendency to forget that. As adults, life gets very serious and we take that serious kind of, I guess, perception into everything we do. And that's why I said it was a real eye-opener to me to come back to that it's okay to play. And play doesn't mean giving up. Play doesn't mean, you know, constantly just not trying or, you know, half-heartedly having a go. Play means exactly that. Get in and push the boundaries and look for different avenues and be okay with failing over and over again until you don't fail.
But it's, you know, it's, I think to a certain degree as well, it's before the roles, when you've got new people, it's on us as senior belts and Rach as the coach, and you know, sometimes me when I'm coaching. But it's on us to set that expectation of what a role is and remind people all the time. It doesn't have to be every session or even every week, but if you set the ground rules, then it'll give people permission to not have to go hard.
Yep.
Especially for the guys who are newer or maybe injured, older, smaller. Gives them something that they can go, right, hey, do you mind if we work on this? And it then opens up the number of people you can roll with to the whole academy instead of going, well, actually, I only want to roll with people that are 60 kilos and below. So it gives everybody that permission to have fun with everybody else.
Yep. Yeah. And we talk about that a lot, using your big words, you know. It's okay to talk.
Yeah.
It's okay to have those conversations with people before you roll. So
I actually think there's probably a lot of, you know, training environments out there where they don't have these conversations. They don't talk to their training partners. They just either are partnered up with them and then they kneel in front of them and tap hands, bump fists and go, or they just go pick someone that they know is going to give them a hard roll and just go at it.
Yeah.
And they almost see that person as like the enemy that they've got to conquer rather than I'm trying to learn and get better at jiu-jitsu.
Make it about your own journey.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything else you wanted to cover off on? Do you have another question?
No, well, I do have like a little bit more with the whole, so we've talked about skin stuff.
Oh, yeah, you wanted to start from the outside in.
Go the outside in. I want to also talk about sort of common, you know, limb injuries, shoulders, elbows, knees. I think, are they the most common sort of things that you see?
Yeah, I think they'd be the most common. And quite often it's like shoulders is an injury that usually we see from people falling on the shoulder. So falling on the point of the shoulder. So either when they're being swept or they're being taken down, or trying to resist a takedown or a sweep by posting on that arm.
Right.
And if you post on your arm when someone's trying to throw you, especially from a massive Uchimata or something, then you are likely to dislocate your shoulder.
Oh.
Yeah, we saw that happen with one of our students in a white belt match once.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, that was one of the days I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But I've put someone's shoulder back in at a judo comp years ago who did that posting, because obviously in judo, if you get hip-oned and you get thrown, you land on your shoulders, that you're out. That's it. There's game over. So there's a little bit more to play for there. Whereas for jiu-jitsu, the takedown's part of it. And you don't even necessarily give away your takedown points if they don't get on top afterwards. So you've got more options for resisting those points in comp than you do in judo.
Okay.
So there's probably a lot less excuse for having that happen to you.
It's probably more just human instinct. I'm falling. I put my hand out. So,
and look, one of the things that I think I would actually love to see is a little bit more falling practice.
I'll be honest, falling, especially leading,
jiu-jitsu.
coming into my surgery, falling scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
I would try and avoid takedowns at all possible. In every role, I would look to try and start on the knees, only because I didn't know. I knew my neck was injured.
Yeah.
I just didn't know how bad it was going to end up, and so I was trying to avoid it. And I don't know how to fall.
Well, and we mentioned Japanese jiu-jitsu earlier, but the first half hour of every session that we used to do was falling practice, effectively. So break falling from different positions and from different heights and different intensities.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think Brazilian jiu-jitsu doesn't really cover anywhere near as much.
I know we did a lot of it when I was doing the motorbike course. We didn't do it practical, but we talked theory a lot about releasing the body and letting the body go loose as you slide and protecting limbs and that kind of thing. But the only thing I can remember in jiu-jitsu where we were doing stuff besides the break fall was where you're doing the knee slide down first. And for me, that's so foreign. It's, trusting my body for my knee to go down in front of me first is an awkward thing. So I think there are elements in falling as well that would have to teach you mentally to trust yourself as well as physically to learn the components to it.
Like with any skill we do, you get used to doing it and your body does it automatically without thinking if you get to that point.
Yeah, but it's repetition, right?
Yeah.
You're doing it over and over.
that actually surprises me because I hadn't thought that falling wrong would have been the main reason behind shoulder injuries. I would have thought like Kimuras and Americanas would have been.
Because most people, if they're putting a Kimura on, a lot of the Kimura setups, you've got a decent amount of control by what you're doing with that. And so the point where you're sort of breaking the grip in it is not normally the point where you're injuring the shoulder. It's the rotational bit. And by that point, you've already gone past the resisting ability of the person you're rolling with. So I think Kimuras are probably less risky unless people don't tap.
Right. Or unless you rip it on because you're
if you're a jerk, you rip it on.
Yeah.
Then
Fucked hard.
Yeah.
There it is.
There it is. Welcome 2025.
I had to have at least one.
first F-bomb of the
I know, that's it.
All right, elbows. Biggest reason why elbows get sore.
So you can have the same issues with elbows if you're posting on the straight arm.
Yep.
And also people sat watching rolls or rolling with somebody with their arm behind them, propping themselves up, and the group behind rolling into it onto that straight elbow.
Yep, seen that happen.
Be a relatively risky point for elbows. And again, not tapping to arm bars or your belly down arm bars where it can be quite hard to tap.
Yep.
So being aware as the person putting on a submission what point you've got to in that submission is important. So with testing the ligaments in a joint, you get to the point where you feel the ligaments sort of stretch a bit because it's kind of like a really tough elastic band, and then it hits what we call the end point. And that's that firmness at the edge of where that ligament's range should be, where it stops. And then if you go past that point, you're starting to damage. So that's when you start to feel pain normally. And then anything past that, you're actually getting tearing.
Is that when you hear the pop, pop, pop? I've heard that a couple of times in my elbow over the years when someone's ripped on an armbar.
Yeah, popping is a little bit more complicated because it's sometimes just about the joint space itself being physically made bigger. And because the joint space is a fixed space and it's got fluid inside it, some of that popping can actually be gases in the fluid coming in and out of solution. So it can be complicated. Then you've got bones, ligaments moving against each other. So pops don't necessarily mean damage
In the elbow.
anywhere,
Right.
but they can. And think about people who can crack their knuckles.
Yeah.
So that's their knuckles popping.
Okay.
Willow can crack from head to toe.
So it's not always a panic
Well,
stations when you might hear
Having
a
said
pop.
that, I have heard people talk about, there's only 2 pops in the elbow, it's fine. It's just, I don't want to make it till there's a third. It's like, I think that's don't rely on that, guys.
Or that really hyper flexible person that you armbar and it pops and they go, oh, that feels so much better, thank you. And you're like, oh, that's really gross. Don't do that to me. I thought I broke something.
Elbows are tricky because even the male-female difference. So male elbows tend to just go to 0, whereas female elbows tend to go past 0. Especially teenage girls, and then you get all the people with hyperflexibility in different joints as well. But you might get 15 degrees past straight on an elbow. Someone like Meg.
Yep. Knees.
So knees are an interesting one because there's a lot of structures to damage at the knee. It's the largest joint in the body. It's weight bearing. It's super important, and you end up with any rotational force on it being something that can potentially damage it. So it may be, it's probably more likely to be your reaction as the person being controlled that you're going to damage your own knee or an accident.
Yep.
So certain positions make it a lot more risky. So if you are playing leg entanglements, then your reaction to the person is definitely going to affect whether your knee is at risk. But then you also get some of the takedowns that have been banned deliberately because they're really high risk to the knee.
Yeah.
So it's when you've got your weight planted on one foot and the knee locked out, it's really at risk. So, or if it's planted and then hit in a direction that the knee isn't going to naturally move, there's a lot of force through that knee and you've got all that person's weight. So the heavier the person is, the more force through that knee, even if the person rolling against them is lighter.
Yeah.
So you've still got massive forces.
And don't twist out of shit. Just don't twist out of it.
Yeah. I'm useless in that regard. I will push until I probably break because I figure there might be a way out for me. But there is a difference between in my world with my knees, because I've had surgery on my knee, but I can feel there's almost like in my head there's a right way to twist out of it and then there's a wrong way to twist out of it.
Well, that's true too.
So
but you've got to know. And
yeah,
if you don't
that's
know,
it. If you don't know, then you fuck it royally.
Yeah, I've seen people blow out their own knee just by twisting. Like their foot is held and then they just start twisting their body to get out of it and you're like, you don't know what you don't know.
Look, that may have worked for them at lower belts when people just go, huh? And they didn't really have anything anyway. But you've got someone who's, if you look at the evolution of leg entanglements at the moment, there's a lot more control in the lead up before someone actually gets to that point where they have a braking mechanic on the other person. Yeah. So it's not just the grip and rip and go for it. Now, unfortunately, some of the defense is also still at that grip and rip stage, the opposite way around. So you're just trying to explode out of it. And if they've got really good control of you, that's not going to work.
Yeah. You're not going anywhere. I will say one step back on the elbows too. I was in a roll one time, and as bizarre as this sounds and as probably stupid as this sounds, I'm sure I'm not the only one. Both my hands and my feet were entangled at the point in the roll, and the person got to an arm situation where my elbow was so overextended, I was in trouble. It didn't occur to me to yell out tap.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. I had nothing available to be able to hit my feet or hit my hands, and my elbow, I was screwed for 6 weeks. I was in so much pain just simply because it didn't. And in the end, I screamed because I was in pain. Yeah. But prior to that, it just didn't occur to me to yell out tap. Like, we can use our words here.
Look, a scream's a tap, but you probably don't want to
Yeah, it was too late by then. I wished I had a yelled tap a few seconds before.
But again, it's probably on us as higher belts to remind people that they can tap with their feet, they can tap with both hands, they can tap with their voice.
Yep.
And that's, I wish I could say I've not fallen foul of that myself, but you totally just lose your words.
Yeah. Sometimes you do.
Or sometimes you're being semi-smothered at the same time. So
They're called boobs, Ed.
look, it doesn't necessarily have to be boobs.
I know.
Rolling with Brendan, who was one of the black belts a few years ago with us before he moved north, and he wasn't a fat guy. He was muscly, but he had a soggy rash guard on.
Yeah.
And so he was in mount on me because I was only a white belt, and he's a black belt, and he's good. And his soggy rash guard fell all over my face.
Gross.
Alien style.
Suction.
I was out, but he had complete control of my arms. So.
I've got one last thing I want to tick off before we wrap up, and that is chokes.
Yeah.
And that is the risk of not tapping to chokes, not just falling asleep, but there's been a lot of stuff lately in the last few years actually about strokes and chokes.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up.
Yeah, can we just
There's some medical research being done at the moment. There's a white paper being done at the moment about that.
I'd love to have the information on that if you can forward it to
Yeah,
me.
we'll find it. There was something, we were looking at it a couple of months ago. I'll find it. But there is some sort of medical research being done at the moment in regards to choking and going unconscious and what that's doing to the body.
Okay. So, and it's not...
Can you, sorry to interrupt, but can you first explain what actually happens in a choke and why do you go out? Because there's a lot of conjecture about that as well. So can you just describe that to us?
So, again, that's not a straightforward answer because it probably depends on the choke.
Oh, okay,
So,
well, let's look at common one, maybe a rear naked choke.
Well, even using the word choke is
strangle.
Probably not accurate.
Okay.
Because choke implies air
Yep.
and strangle implies blood.
Okay.
So we don't call it rear naked strangle. We probably should.
Danaher does, but that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And he likes to be accurate in what
he does.
he says.
Yeah.
So
Okay, I did not know that, so that's really interesting.
yeah, but in the same way, we talk about lacerations for all cuts, and lacerations are actually blunt splitting of the skin rather than incisions that are sharp.
So I knew that I knew
things,
that difference. Yeah.
But we, in common words, we just don't tend to make that difference. Even medically, we don't. So.
Okay. Yeah.
So with the different types of chokes, one of the main ways, so with a rear naked strangle, what you're trying to do is you're trying to stop the blood flowing up both carotid arteries at the same time. So you're disturbing that blood flow to the brain. And if you disturb that for a certain number of seconds, then you are likely to get people compromised first of all, then have the potential to see stars, then potentially lose consciousness. Then if you go past that, you risk going into the situations where you can get more and more damage.
So we're actually stopping blood from getting to the brain. Yeah. Okay. And then so why, when you go unconscious, do you go into immediate dream world?
Not everybody does.
Okay.
So if anybody's ever fainted, it can feel very, very different depending on what's going on at the time it happens. So sometimes having fainting and waking up from it can feel like you've had a most beautiful sleep. So I think it depends.
Okay.
As for why we go into a dream world, I'm not sure anybody knows enough about that. I certainly don't. So I'm not really going to comment on that.
Got a lot of questions around.
All
it.
right. Well, let's skip back to the strokes then. Let's have a little talk
So,
on that.
Well, there's a couple of other mechanisms for the chokes working. So if you don't quite have that clean cutting off of both carotids, then you may have enough pressure on the veins coming out of the brain to cause a backflow of pressure. And so you might have partial pressure on the arteries, but then enough pressure on the veins to stop the blood flowing. So if you think about when someone's taking blood off you, they put the tourniquet on your arm, your veins all swell up.
Yep.
And so they can see them. So it creates a lot more pressure. Well, the veins in your neck are huge. So if you can create more pressure in them, you're actually going to potentially overcome the artery pressure as well. So if you can stop the blood either going in or coming out of the brain, you're going to get that pressure build up and have the same effect. So that's why some chokes are a slow build, some come on super quick. You've also got some reflexes that come from areas just in your carotid artery. And so especially if you're using things like gi chokes where you've got a really thin fabric that's putting pressure on one area, especially if that moves a little bit, you can get people blacking out from the reflex of that artery being touched.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So they're blacking out. They haven't. Is that different to somebody being strangled?
Same effect ultimately.
Okay, and same effect to the brain. It's still that blood loss to the brain.
Partly it can actually slow your heart rate as well.
Okay.
So it can be a bit of it. And I don't think many studies have been done on that.
Okay.
Because in general, people doing this, and it's generally older people that will have that hypersensitivity to irritation of the neck.
Okay. What do you, in your opinion, what are the side effects? What are the downsides to people not tapping before they go into that twilight state?
So part of that will depend on whether the person who's putting the choke on is aware of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've all seen horror MMA fights where the ref hasn't really spotted that the guy is out, and
Too often.
or girl.
Yep.
And there's this length of time before they come to, and you actually see them having a seizure on the mat, in the octagon, wherever. And that's one of those signs of extra damage being done.
Okay.
And so depending on how far you go can depend on how much damage you're going to get to those brain cells from not having oxygen to them for that long.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not there's damage from just getting to the unconscious stage, I think this is what the white paper was looking at, and I had actually heard of that one when you went into a bit more detail about it. So it'd be interesting to see what they come up with that. Yep. One of the bigger risks that's talked about by one guy in particular, I've forgotten his name, I'll have to dig that out. So he had a stroke after a choke was put on him, and that was because of damage to the artery itself. Now, the damage to the artery itself can come from pressure in the artery, pressure on the artery from the outside or the inside, or it can come from a weakness in the artery that was there already.
Right.
And so you can have problems with the carotid arteries at the front or the vertebral arteries that go through your spine at the back, depending on what position you're in. So things like neck cranks put the arteries at the back at risk. Most chokes put the arteries at the front at risk.
Okay. And if you have a problem with your arteries, like the third option, most people wouldn't know that though, would they?
No, they wouldn't. And I talked to Grant a few years ago about whether you all know that when you do when it's the cycle for certain weeks in the gym, you feel it in your neck. Yep. So when it's guillotine week, depending on what sort of guillotine is, you're often going home like, oh. So I'd be really interested to actually do a study where we ultrasound people's necks in the gym normally.
Oh, yeah.
And check that their arteries look good, and then ultrasound them after guillotine week and just see whether there's any damage that we're not knowing about that stays asymptomatic and just heals by itself.
Oh, wow.
Now, unfortunately, I think we'd have to do that in lots of gyms all over the world to see this really small percentage of damage that is being done, because it is pretty rare.
Yeah.
But that's just something I'd like to do out of interest in the future.
So I have a question then.
Yeah.
Complete side track for a second. If there's other doctors that are training around the world right now listening to this episode, and they all put their hand up and we got a collection of you all together, is this something that realistically could be done?
Yes, it can definitely be done. It's just a case of whether or not we'd be able to get enough sample size to bring out that really small risk.
Yep. Okay.
So...
Oh, I was sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, but I was just going to say, so is it better to do things in blocks like that, or is it better then to do sequence of moves where you do?
Don't know.
Don't know.
This is the problem. We don't know
enough
about it, and the number of people getting affected is really small, but the effects can be devastating.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
And, to people that are listening that are just starting their jiu-jitsu journey or whatever, guys, keep in mind you can get hit by a bus walking out on the street. So this is like a very small part of this martial arts, sports, etc.
And some of the things we've talked about already are really relevant for reducing that risk.
Yeah.
So if you try and hold on through a guillotine that's not putting you to sleep yet, but it's really uncomfortable, then it's probably doing damage somewhere. So if you've got pain and you're not tapping because it's sore, but I'm not out yet,
and I'm being stubborn, and
then something is likely to be being damaged.
Mm-hmm.
So the key message there is, if you clearly cannot escape what's going on and it's hurting,
Yep.
it's okay to tap.
Yeah.
And unless it's, Craig Jones Invitational and $1 million in a suitcase
Tap anyway.
about to be handed, to
you
you,
got to get up the next
and
day
you think
and
you got a
live.
chance,
Yeah.
well, guys, just tap.
Tap anyway. Tap,
So
tap, tap.
I've actually seen one guy this year from another gym who came in for scans because he'd been compromised with guillotine.
yeah.
So, and luckily his was completely normal. It was just the muscles were really sore over the top, but he was sensible, knew there was an issue, and came to get looked at.
Yeah.
And I think the main message for me with this is tap early so it doesn't become an issue. So if you've got pain, then you know that you're in a position where you are compromised.
Yep.
And if you've got any symptoms afterwards, go and get help.
Yep.
Now, symptoms that are really important to look up for with neck things are stroke symptoms. So we talk about the FAST way of screening. So is there any asymmetry of your face? I'll tell you what, we'll put a link to that as well so people don't have to remember it.
Yeah, no,
That would
but,
be
but,
good,
but
but
please
tell
talk
us
us through.
anyway.
So
Yeah.
basically, is asymmetry of your face, is one of your arms weak, is your speech altered, and then it relies on me remembering what the T is.
And we will put the list up on that. Thank you.
There's a poster.
Yeah, we'll get
read
it.
it
And
once.
we'll get it. And then we moved it.
It's up on the wall at work.
Well,
And
no,
it hasn't moved for a long time.
so our assessment of stroke's a lot more detailed. So
Yeah,
we'd be
yeah.
going into a much, much more detail. And what I can't remember off the top of my head is what the first aid acronym.
And I just did my first aid, and I remember that, but I don't remember the T.
There's only so much information.
Yeah, you can.
I think it's
absorb.
time, actually. I think the T is time.
Okay.
So, what time did this come over?
Yeah.
So,
And that's okay. We'll put the link up. So if you were to give a short, if you're going to start your jiu-jitsu journey from a medical practitioner's heed of advice, how would you synopsis that?
for strokes,
For anything, just in jiu-jitsu, for a
injuries,
new
okay.
person coming onto the mats that wants to have an 11-year journey
Yeah.
to go from white belt to black belt,
Okay.
what do they got to know?
So first of all, you are going to be crap.
Yep.
To begin with. And you are going to be the worst person in the room when you first walk in there.
Yep.
And so especially as an adult, that's really hard to hear.
Mm.
Especially if you've done something before. So if you've been a footy player, you've been a CrossFitter. I just love it when the CrossFitters come in.
They gas in the first 5
Yeah.
minutes. They don't like it because they're
We've
like the
talked
fittest
about this.
people on
Yeah.
earth, and they gas out because their
Yeah.
mat fitness is not.
Not there.
You are going to be the worst person, and it will take a long time till you feel like you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, everybody else in the room is improving with you. So you're not magically going to rise up the ranks in the room because they're all getting better too.
Yep.
And that's good because it means that you're going to have plenty of challenges. I had 3 months off the mat this year, came back, and a lot of the guys that were struggling a little bit with certain things are amazing now. And that's great to see because you've got so many more challenges.
Yeah.
So by the time you and Matt come back, you're going to find that you're going to have some really hard roles.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thanks for that.
But you know what? It doesn't take long to bounce back.
No.
That's the thing too.
No, yeah.
Like, so you've got to put the ego aside just for a little bit and know that, okay, my timing's going to be off. But you don't forget how to do a choke or an arm bar or things like that. It's just the timing that's a bit off for a while, and then that comes back. So
It's interesting just even coming back now doing what little I'm doing. I'm not doing a lot, just for, anyone that's listening. But even in the little bits that I'm doing, when we get down and we play ping pong, knowing, like without thinking, my body is just going into movements. And, there's still a lot of freezing going, nah, I got nothing. But what I do know does come back in the movement. So there is a lot of muscle memory in this.
yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, so they're going to be crap. What else?
And just, that's at that point where they won't want to be crap. So they won't want to tap because they feel like they should be able to beat this smaller person or this older person or whatever. Or for a lot of blokes, it's like, I don't want to be tapped by a girl.
Yep.
But we've got some kick-ass women in the academy, and you're going to be tapped by them.
Yep.
So it's giving them permission to tap.
Yeah.
But also with, very new white belts, it's not fair on them to be doing full sparring with purple belts and blue belts that have been doing it for 6-7 years and expecting to be on the same playing field. They need a game to play. So they need a way that they can win without submitting the other person. So, can you get on top, stay on top?
Yep.
Can you escape from underneath, man?
The small goals.
Can you do something so you feel like you got a little win?
Yep.
And, they're not going to get a submission because they don't know any.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what the positions were called when I first started.
No, me
So,
either.
and, Grant was out the front teaching and saying, all right, everybody just go to close guard. I'm like,
Yeah. Quick, watch the other people on the mat.
so, it's...
Yep.
You've got to give them small goals, otherwise they'll feel completely lost. Now, Rachael always talks the new guys through on the side of the mat when the sparring goes on, because that's probably the most intimidating bit of it.
Yeah.
And the only submissions they might know is the one they've learnt that day.
And that's
and
why
you're never going to hit the technique
no,
of the day
and I
that
always
night.
say to the people, I'm like, to new people, I always say, your number one goal is to try and get on top. That's it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you can get on top, you win.
Yeah, that's
it.
it.
And then I'll say to the training partners who I partner with them, their number one goal is to get on top. So start with, 40% resistance and then slowly increase it as they go.
Yeah.
So that person also knows what their goal is so
Yeah.
that they can sort of help them win a little bit, because it's important to feel that like, oh, I did get
Yeah.
on top,
got there.
even if normally you wouldn't.
I just thought of another question. Sorry. So we've talked a lot about injuries and a lot around jiu-jitsu in the adult world. I'm just curious. We spoke about strength and conditioning, right, and stretching and the need for the two. Do all of these principles apply to children in jiu-jitsu as well? Is there anything different you would advise to parents that have kids in jiu-jitsu?
That's a very good question. So the biggest difference between kids and us, especially kids in school, they get permission to exercise several times a week all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what is missing for most adults. And a lot of the time, secondary school. So secondary school stops kids having mandatory exercise relatively early these days, and I don't believe they should. So although, I'm not a massive believer in the way that we had to exercise in our underwear if we didn't bring our PE kit, it's
There's a visual.
it's still,
Is that an English thing or I don't know?
Christ, isn't it cold over there like 360 days a
British.
year? Yeah.
But, that sort of ridicule and, get on with it anyway
Yeah.
is what put a lot of people off
Yep.
exercising. Whereas, making sure that they've got an option that they can exercise and enjoy it is a healthy habit for life.
Yep.
And the ability to exercise, and specifically the ability to get yourself up off the floor if you fall over, is probably the most linked to longevity of anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's good for everything, jiu-jitsu irrelevant.
Yeah.
So the other thing with kids is again, when I was growing up, it was thought that doing weight training for kids would stunt their growth. It's bullshit. So kids can totally do resistance training. They can totally get in there and do weights and get a program from somebody who's teaching them the right way. So they get into good habits early.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no reason why kids shouldn't be doing the same sort of things as we are, and they'll be really good at it.
Yeah.
And kids love doing what their parents are doing. They love playing with them.
Yeah.
And so get your kids doing stuff while they're still flexible enough, and they'll keep that flexibility for a lot longer.
Yeah.
Very true. I love watching our kids head over here to the gym and doing their stuff. And they train jiu-jitsu. That's the mandatory part of their life. But they choose to come over here and get in the gym and do stuff. And Matt's written programs for the eldest one, and the little ones just follow in suit. So
Yeah.
it's good.
Awesome. All right. Well, without further ado, let's do hope.
So, Dr. Phil, HOPE, as I have tattooed on my arm, is an acronym which you've probably heard about,
Yeah.
helping one person every day. And it's the motto in which we raise the kids as well. We just feel like if you can put something out there for people and it helps them, then that's a good thing. So we finish every episode with the hope, which we will continue to do. I guess my hope, having had this episode with you, is that, and the one thing that I didn't learn probably early enough in my jiu-jitsu, whether from ego or stupidity, I don't know, or probably column A and B, is tap. Just whatever it takes, understand that jiu-jitsu is learning. You're not there to win in training. You don't have to win in training, but it is important to learn. And the only way you can learn is to tap and regroup and start again. So if in doubt, tap, figure it out and go again. That's my hope for all of you. Be okay with tapping.
Love it. That's so important. Tap early, tap often.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And I didn't. And
Use your voice.
Yeah. Learn to go tap, tap. In my first few years, I took a lot of injuries from elbows, from knees. Obviously, my neck ended up in a place that nobody ever wants to go. And a lot of it is on me. A lot of it was my journey and not tapping often and soon enough.
We should probably get people in the habit when they're learning to tap to use the voice at the same time. So it just becomes that second nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's something I don't think we do at the moment. So maybe we should institute that as a way of empowering people and reminding people to use their voice at the same time.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. What's your hope, my love?
Pedro Sauer says it best when, he talks at his seminars and he says about treating the mat like a laboratory and we are all the scientists.
Oh, nice.
And when you think about the mat, not as a fighting thing or a winning thing or something like that, but it's your laboratory where we're all scientists working together to each make our jiu-jitsu better. And so everyone's working towards that common goal. It changes the mindset around training.
Yep.
And therefore, it's more likely that if you get someone caught in a submission, that you'll be a little slower putting it on, because also you want your science to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
So you're not rushing through things to snap it on or if and we say it at Iconic all the time, if you have to rush through a submission to make it work, there's something wrong with your technique.
Yeah.
So if you're slowing down and you're putting all the pieces into place and you're still getting your submission and you're putting it on slowly enough that your training partner has all the time in the world to tap, then that's great. On the flip side, if you're on the receiving end of that and you're getting tapped, well, okay, well, I've got caught, but there's no distress in this, or there's no shame in me tapping.
Yep.
It is just we're all learning to get better, and I've just learnt more about my jiu-jitsu because I've been tapped.
Yep.
If you've come to it with that mindset, suddenly everything changes about your training environment and you're able to stay safer and not get as injured. And of course, injuries will always happen because accidents happen and we are humans. Yep. And there's all different levels of people on the mat all the time. But, I think that's such a beautiful mindset. So that would be my hope.
Treat it like it's a science lab.
Yeah.
Go slow, tap often. What's your hope, Dr. Phil?
So my hope is that people listen to their bodies, and when they have an issue, go and get external help for it.
Yep.
So
great one.
Great place to start is your GP or physio.
Yep.
So get a good physio if you're doing sport. You will need them again and again.
Yeah, that's super important, right?
Find out from friends who a good physio is, find out from your GP who a good physio is for what you have wrong with you at the time as well. Because just like anything, they specialise too.
Yep, absolutely.
Unless you're at Iconic, we have a Dr. Phil.
Look, and I'm
wonderful.
a specialist generalist. And when I know that I don't know,
yep,
I go, right, you need to go see this person and they will give us an answer. If they don't know, I know that they will know they don't know and they'll pass you on as well.
And that's a massive thing for me, historically, that's been a massive thing in both the medical and the legal world.
Yeah.
You're onto a good person when they can call it and go, this is beyond me and I'm going to refer you to the next person.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. So
for sure.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to all of our listeners before we cut out for today and say thank you for joining us?
Oh, there's plenty of things we could talk about, but I think that'll do for today.
Well, thank
Sounds
you
good.
so much for coming on today and sharing your wisdom and your insight and all of your knowledge with us, and all of our listeners. I'm sure that, everyone will get a lot out of that today.
100%. And thanks for the belly laugh over the crabs too. I'm sure I'll never live it down.
Look, if you've liked what you've heard today, please like, subscribe, share, 5 stars, do all the things.
Absolutely. Give us a review. Send us some questions for the next few episodes coming up.
Yep.
Don't forget that the T-shirt competition's out there. We're going to be pulling that to an end soon as well, and getting some T-shirts out and about to the listeners anywhere where you might be listening. And also, thank you so much to Dr. Phil for joining us here today.
Yay.
pleasure.
All right.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye, guys. This podcast is a My Broken Soldier production.
And brought to you by Iconic Jiu Jitsu.